Seven Mary 3, Cumbersome, Temple of the Dog, Say Hello to Heaven, REM, The One I Love for today's three-way adventure.
You're listening to Adam Chapman, a.k.a. Boston radio legend Adam 12, and he's our guest on this week's The Broadcasters Broadcast with Andy Mounter. Indeed, I'm Andy Mounter, and welcome to The Broadcasters Broadcast. This week, we have Adam 12, who I've listened to since I was a kid when he was on the legendary WBCN. And this really wasn't for a podcast per se. I did this for one of my classes during my master's program, but I thought it was just too good to not have it on a podcast. So here we are, the Adam 12 podcast.
I would intern at WFNX. At first, I started just doing all-day Fridays because the campus was closed on Fridays, so I had Fridays off, so I kind of did that. And then I would fill in times during the week. And yes, that was kind of the beginning for me, is getting that internship at WFNX, getting my foot in the door, allowed me to, I started as a music department intern. This was in like January of 1997. Come that summer, I was kind of in charge of the interns in the music department. And then by the end of the year, I was board opping and then ended up getting on the air part-time.
Wow. And then you went to FNX.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Really just being there. At the time, again, FNX was owned by the Boston Phoenix. Stephen Mindich was very much, his idea was that FNX should be a radio representation of what his weekly newspaper was. So there were obviously a lot of parallels between what was in the Boston Phoenix, what was on the radio. But for the most part, FNX did its own thing. And at the time, and we're talking about like the late 90s, the people who were in charge, like if you got in the door there as an intern or as a van driver or promotions person or whatever else, and you proved your worth and you were easy to get along with, they'd keep you around and they'd fire you or hire you rather. And that's what happened with me is I was able to kind of prove my worth as an intern there and then get myself on the air part-time. Laurie Gale was the music director, and then as acting program director for a few months, and she's the one that put me on the air first. It was Christmas of 1997, my first shift.
And if you go on any, that's fine.
Sorry, no.
You can stop anytime.
Grab no. Ask another question because I know that in a couple minutes before I got to do a break. Just want to get a drink of water.
So you were there for a little bit, and when you were there, did any of the higher ups critique your tapes? Make you better?
Yes. Shouts to morning guy Ty, who was the morning host at the time, and I would just pepper him with my college radio show, and he would just say, "Stop ripping me off," because I was completely ripping him off, because he was my favorite. I mean, he was the morning show host, and he was the gold standard as far as I was concerned, with a great sense of humor and just an encyclopedic music knowledge. So I would have him listen, and then later on Storm Zabel, who was the night host at FNX for years, he would listen and give me pointers, and that's how the culture was then. The kind of the older generation, the more established full-time DJs would bring along the part-time DJs and give you some feedback and make you feel like you were part of the team. And I've tried, because people like that were so kind to me when I was first starting out. I always try to do the same for young broadcasters. I've been lucky enough when I went back to FNX a second time, I was the internship coordinator. So I was able to bring in young talent and do the same thing. I ended up as assistant program director. So it was me sitting down with the part-time DJs and kind of critiquing their demos and telling them what to do.
And when you got a shot at BCN, they had a contest,
yes.
I remember.
Yes.
Right, for the afternoon slot after Howard Stern.
Yep.
Did you know you were going to win it, or did you actually just played the game and went through the competition?
I had no idea. All right, so yes, I auditioned for the midday shift at BCN. They did a whole DJ search. They brought in, I think it was 60 some odd people. There were a dozen of us that were actually radio professionals in some capacity, and then I know everybody else, they brought in like the Lenny Clarks of the world and kind of, local celebrities and such. I auditioned in November of 2002. And I was looking at other jobs as well. At the time, I was working in Albuquerque for Clear Channel, which is now iHeartRadio. I was working for a station there, and then stations in Salt Lake City and Denver. But I was looking to, get into a bigger market or to get, closer to home. So I did the audition, and I really didn't think much of it after that. It was right after that was the holiday season, and was kind of doing my thing. And then it was in January, and my girlfriend at the time was like, "Hey, you should follow up on some of these, demos you sent out and things like that last year, and see if, now that it's the new year, if they're going to hire anybody. So it's January of 2003, and I emailed Steve Strick, who at the time was the assistant program director, music director at BCN. Said, hey, just wondering if you guys have made a call on the DJ search. I'm looking at some other options as well. And all he emailed me back, he said, Oedipus will call you. That's all the email said. And then within minutes, I had Oedipus calling me on the phone, offering me the job, which I did not expect at all. So that was pretty cool.
And all those years with BCN, was it key to have someone like Howard Stern follow in? I guess you'd be your follower.
The lead-in, yeah, he was the lead-in. Believe it or not, it was intimidating because they hired. So when BCN hired me, it was CBS Radio, and they had Howard on in a bunch of markets. And the problem they were having with their stations is Howard was Howard. I mean, he was outperforming the entire radio station. So you were seeing in most markets that CBS had Howard on, and again, we're talking about the early 2000s here because I started at BCN in 2003. So they were seeing anywhere upwards of a 75% drop off after his show was over. So like 3/4 of the listening audience was leaving and going someplace else. And obviously that's not good business. So, part of what CBS wanted to do was bring in talent that, could stave off a little bit of that. So when I first kind of learned, and that was one of the goals, we want you to hang on to as many of Howard's listeners as you can. Thankfully, between myself and what I was able to do on the air, and really because of the programming from Oedipus and Steve Strick, Steve especially, because he was very kind. And before I took over middays at BCN, I was the music director at the radio station I worked for in Albuquerque. And he kind of he was like, hey, you were a music director, so you can have some input on the music that you play. And because of that, I used that kind of cachet, if you will, to champion bands like Dropkick Murphys, Darkbuster, Cave In, local punk and metal bands that had records out that I thought people should know about. So there was I was able to kind of localize my show in a way that other shows weren't doing. And ended up being that we were hanging on to more than 50% of Howard's audience after a while, which again, still a pretty precipitous drop off, but not as bad as it was in other markets.
And and back when he was on terrestrial radio, he basically ended whenever he wanted to. Was that also annoying or a great thing? Because you were on it, you didn't have to be on the air ASAP.
At first it was. Well, I was always at the station. I was always at the station by 10, 15. But there were some days where he would because Howard would go long, and because we'd have a backlog of commercials, obviously, that we had to catch up with. There'd be days where I wouldn't start my shift till 11:15. Wow. But again, it's not only is it Howard, but Howard wants to get out of there, and like anybody else wants to get out of work. But so if Howard was going long, it was for a good reason. He either had a really good, a bit of drama going on within the show, Baba Booey did something wrong, or he had a really good interview going on. So at first it was a little bit, it would throw me off because I'm very much like a lot of radio people, very much a creature of habit, and I like to do things in, a certain way in a certain order. So it was a little bit of a throw off at first when kind of not knowing when, Howard's show would end, but I got used to it after a while.
Was there someone that growing up, of course, Stern didn't show up until the mid-'90s here. Like Charles Lacadera was, his basically Stern of Boston until he showed up. Was there someone that you liked other than, say, I know you mentioned Morning Guy Ty?
Yeah.
That inspired you in your delivery and.
Yeah. It's funny. Ty was someone that his sense of humor was quirky. He knew so much about music, and that resonated with me more than anybody else. Oddly enough, the station that I really enjoyed listening to when I was starting out in radio in the mid to late 90s was Oldies 103. I know that that's outside of the format that I work in, but all those DJs were so good, and they would kind of they do that kind of old school boss jock, hey, kind of delivery over the ins and outs of songs, but it didn't sound like it was the 1960s. They still sounded like conversational and human, and not like they were talking to you and not at you. And that's always been something that I've tried to do, with the way that I deliver on the radio is I try not to stop down the music for too long, because I know that people are just like me. I want to hear the music. That's why I come here. So I try to get my breaks over the ins and outs of songs, but I also try to sound like a human being. I try to sound like the way that I would sound if you and I were sitting at the bar having a beer just talking about music. So really, the DJs and the air talents that have been able to do that are the ones that I kind of have looked up to.
I'm here with Mr. Adam 12, and we're talking about his radio career and him at the legendary WBCN in Boston. So we left off with you getting a gig, and then we were at how you were getting the gig, and now unfortunately it ended. Stern left for Sirius,
Right.
and then we had now who's still in town, Toucher and Rich. Well, sorry, Debbie Lee Roth, the famous Debbie Lee Roth, took over.
Jeez.
Him.
Yes.
And I remember at the time he
Ridiculous.
demoed here in Boston.
Yes. At
And
ZLX.
it's ELX.
Yep.
And funny enough, I went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, and
Right
one
on.
of the instructors was Hutch. Is it
It
Hutch?
was Hutch, yeah.
Yeah,
He was
and
the producer, yeah.
He was the nicest guy. Too.
He's a great guy.
But it was worrisome when Stern left BCN.
Yes.
And then you had to deal with Diamond Dave.
Yes.
And then, Opie and Anthony for a little bit.
Yep.
And then Touch and Rich, and then that was it.
Yes.
Was all that concerning for you as the afternoon drive host? The afternoon, yeah.
The midday host, yeah.
Midday host,
The concerning part was David Lee Roth. That was an absolute disaster. And I remember getting up on that morning in January and turning my station on and thinking, this is the beginning of the end. There's no way. And that was literally minutes into the first show. It was just like, no, this is not a good idea. And again, that's a subject for a whole other day. You could do a whole other project on how that came to be and what a disaster it was. But thankfully, they pulled the plug on it quickly and were able to get that Opie and Anthony deal worked out well. And I'll say this, I mean, I obviously loved my years with Howard, because what better lead-in could you ask for than the Howard Stern Show? But that lineup at BCN with Opie and Anthony in the morning, me in middays, Toucher and Rich in the afternoon, Hardy like late afternoons, evenings. Mark Hamilton, I think, was doing kind of like a early late night type of show too. Like, that was a strong lineup. I really enjoyed those years at BCN. And then obviously when Toucher and Rich moved to mornings, Hardy back in afternoons. Like, I think Hamilton went to nights then. Might have been Dan O'Brien too. But yeah, we had some good years together. We did.
And then when things ended, were you obviously shocked because it was the Rockabye?
Oh, I was.
History.
Yeah, I was on summer vacation with my family, Wells Beach in Maine, and my program director at the time was Mike Thomas, and he called me on a Monday at like 5:05. My phone's ringing. It's my boss. I'm like, that's never a good thing. And I thought he was joking with me. I thought he was doing a bit. I'm like, oh, well, obviously I'm on vacation, and Toucher and Rich have the program director calling me up to do a goof and say, oh, the station's flipping formats. They're going to turn this into a bit for their show. And he kept saying, like, no, this isn't a joke. He goes, I was on vacation until last night. They called me and said, you have to fly home and start letting everybody know, because this is going to happen. So, yes, I was shocked, because, BCN, you took it for granted, right? It was BCN since 1968. It was always going to be around. And that was the first example or experience that I had in radio of, these things don't last forever. These institutions, be they a BCN or an FNX or what have you, everything has a shelf life, including me. So it's sobering.
So eventually you went back to FNX, your first paying gig.
Yep.
When did you get reached out? Immediately, or did you have to wait some time?
No, it's funny. The first person that reached out to me after BCN was J-Bo Jones, who's now doing afternoons down the hall here at WROR. At the time, he was programming Mix 104.1. And because remember, that was part of the, Sports Hub went to 98.5 and Mix moved to 104.1, BCN's old frequency. And he was like, I want you to come, do weekends on Mix. I'm like, dude, I don't know anything about the music you play. It's like, really, like, I don't. And he's like, it's all right. He told me, it's okay. You're a good jock. You'll figure it out. So he had faith in me, which was very kind. He gave me a shot on a station and a format that I'd never worked in. So I ended up working at Mix first. And then about a month later, Keith Dakin and Fletcher from FNX called me up, and they were like making fun of the fact that I was doing weekends on Mix. I'm like, hey, look, it's a paying radio gig, buddy. And everybody at Mix was so kind to me. And they said, why don't you come and do weekends at FNX too? So for a stretch there at the end of 2009, I was at both 2000, yeah, 2009. I was at both stations. I would do I'd do weekender fill-in shifts at Mix and FNX. And then there were some changes at FNX at the end of that year that eventually gave me the opportunity to take over as the afternoon host. And that was in 2010.
So I didn't even know about that Mix 104.
Yeah.
Well, now
Mix 1041, yeah. Yeah.
Were you apprehensive at the time when you went there? Because like you said, you didn't.
Oh, I was nervous as hell. Yeah. Like I literally, and it's funny too, because I did like a test shift like early on a Saturday morning from like 5 to 8 a.m. And there were songs on there that I'd never heard before. And I wasn't familiar enough with the automated system that they were using to know how to like audition the songs. So I was literally just like guessing. Which is funny because when I did mornings in Albuquerque, my host and I used to do a bit called Ghost Post, where we would throw a song that the other guy had never heard on before, and you would have to hit the post. You'd have to like talk over the beginning of the song until you got to the lyrics. So I was literally doing that live on the air, basically auditioning for a job. So yeah, it was a little bit stressful, but over time I learned the music. And again, everybody at Mix was so kind and so welcoming to me, and they were like, what can we do to help you? What can we do to make you comfortable? So it was a good experience.
And would you continued on if you didn't find the FNX job?
Yeah, I had both of those jobs, and it was like whichever one peters out first and turns into something full time, that's the one that I'll go with. And luckily it was the FNX one, because not only did I have more background with FNX, but it also gave me more opportunities, because when I was hired to do afternoons, I was also kind of the de facto social media guy, because again, this is 2010 and radio stations are still trying to figure out social media strategy. Facebook, I don't even know if in 2010 Facebook was open to the public. Oh yeah, I think it was just open to the public for a couple of years. Twitter had just launched a year or two before. So I was able to get my feet wet early on with, content production and social media, which that ended up when FNX went off the air and we ended up launching Radio BDC at the Boston Globe. I had all those kind of base skills that I was then able to take and learn even more from all the great people at Boston.com and the Boston Globe.
To me, personally, maybe 2012 and 2013, and possibly some 2014 were maybe one of the best, or maybe last great years of alternative music.
Sure.
Do you feel like, and maybe this is just a general music question, has it really gone downhill in terms of new music, or is it just us being old fogies and not allowing the new music to be accepted?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think there's a couple of things going on where right now there's more new music to discover than we've ever had before, because of the access that we have now with the technology that we have to find. But I think part of it too is we're now missing. You think about BCN and FNX aren't on the air anymore. Those radio stations are just two examples of many terrestrial radio stations that for decades were a curation tool for new artists and new music, where if you were a radio listener, you could count on that. You could count on those DJs on stations like that to point you in the directions of new music. So now we've got this weird paradox of there's even more to choose from than there was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now we don't have the tour guides that we used to have. We have algorithms, we have Spotify. And that's great if you love your Spotify daily. If you want to put in a song you like and let an algorithm spit out some ideas to you, all the power to you. But it doesn't have the same impact that a human being does, and it doesn't have the same connection that a human being does. So.
Yeah, and I guess another theory of mine is, and they were dumped on at the time when they were in their prime, but record companies, I thought, did a good job for the most part finding talent.
Yes.
And unfortunately, obviously with streaming, that's sort of also gone downhill. Record companies they're barely making money now.
Well, yeah, and well, think about it. Like, what department are you talking? You're really talking about A&R, right? Yeah. Artist and repertoire, and all of these labels have tried to make ends meet, just like broadcasting companies have. They've downsized, and a lot of times it ends up being the A&R department that gets downsized. So if you don't have music savvy people out in the clubs, scouting new talent, you get the situation that you're talking about.
Move on to BDC, and I was saying, was that a huge challenge facing you're going against terrestrial and satellite radio at the time?
Yeah, it was a huge challenge because what we were doing hadn't been done before. And again, ironically, what are we, 10, 11 years later, now it's a foregone conclusion. There's internet radio stations all over the place. There's great ones right here in Boston on Certain FM, which is TJ Conley, who worked with us at Radio BDC. Was the DJ for the Red Sox for years. He now is running a fantastic sounding online radio station. But yes, so in 2012, so FNX goes away. The general manager of Boston.com, Lisa DeSisto, has this great idea, says, let's bring in some of the FNX people and basically let them do FNX on Boston.com. Because at the time, Boston.com needed more users and more engagement on their website. And they're like, what better way if we can get people coming here to listen to the radio station that they loved for all those years and interact with some of the content that they create. But I remember telling my wife at the time about the job, and she's like, a streaming radio station? And I'm like, look, if it lasts 6 months, it gets me to my next job. Yeah. And not only did it last 6 months, it lasted 6 years before the Globe kind of let us spin off and create Indy 617. And again, I think a lot of the streaming radio stations now, or even streaming audio products, you can kind of tie back to that. I'm not saying that they all looked at that model and said, let's do this. But I think, in some way, shape, or form, what we were able to do and create with Radio BDC really did set the tone and kind of create a foundation for a lot of these other digital creators that are doing similar things now.
Was it easier because you had people like Paul Driscoll and Julie Kramer, come with you guys, with you to this new...
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that was, Lisa was smart. She was like, if I can get, it's the personalities, right? Like what ties back to what we talked about earlier. You make that connection with the voice that's on the radio. And people like me, maybe not so much me because I'd bounced around a little bit, obviously, but Julie had been on FNX for years, and Henry Santorum had been on FNX for years, and Paul had been at FNX for a long time and had been programming the station and was so familiar with the musical DNA of what made FNX successful, but also has this great set of ears where he can hear what the next big thing is going to be, and it can also work new music into that DNA. Again, he's still doing it now with Indy 617. Paul's an amazing programmer. And really was the right guy at the right time to kind of, as FNX is going away, to kind of recreate it as Radio BDC with that same spirit and that same musical DNA.
So you left in 2019?
Yeah. So we became Indy 617 in early 2018, and then yes, I came here to Rock 92.9 in 2019. Because it was in April of 2019 that they switched formats. They were all to 92.9. They switched to Rock 92.9. They were looking for, at the time, they were looking for an afternoon host. But then when I talked to program director at the time, Ken West, we ended up working out a schedule where I'd be on middays, much like I was for the years at BCN. So it kind of makes sense.
Did you, were you happy to be back, or were you sad, you're leaving your friends at Indy 617?
There was a little bit of both. I'd reached a point where I'd been doing the Radio BDC Indy 617 thing for a while, and Indy really was, for all intents and purposes, a startup. Radio BDC was as well, but when we were hired, we were a startup that was backed financially by the New York Times, who owned the Globe at the time. So it was kind of like, yeah, real startup. You got all this money to play along with. But Indy was like a legit startup. Like we were putting sweat equity into that. And I was also in my early 40s, and my kids were getting older. So I had some choices to make. Like if I'd been still in my late 20s, early 30s, that would have been a better fit for me job-wise. So it got to the point where I was like, I need something that's a little bit better schedule fit for me and a little bit better vibe fit for me. And luckily this came along, and I'm grateful for it.
And you've always been sort of the afternoon, the mid-shift.
Yeah, midday, yeah.
Midday, why do I screw that up? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Midday guy, all these stations. Did you ever fantasize working afternoon drive or being a morning guy, or were you just happy to be?
I like middays the best. I've done them all. I did mornings in Albuquerque. I did overnights when I was starting out, did afternoons at FNX, did nights. But yes, middays I think are the best fit for me. And especially here in Boston, I think that's where people that listen to the radio are most used to hearing me. So it's good to kind of still be part of the fabric of their day in that way.
I'll ask, and if you don't want to answer this, it's fine. you were on the air during the Boston bombing, 10
Yes.
years, which is hard to believe, 10 years ago
Yeah,
already.
I know.
Were you actually talking in the microphone when the bombs went off, or were you on a sort of break from the...
I literally had stepped outside of Forum to record a break because I was doing my breaks and sending them back to the studio. We had live DJs on the air at Radio BDC, and I was kind of doing cut-ins, and I was sending them breaks to play on the radio. I had stepped out to cut a break, and the crowd was very thick in front of Forum. So I went to my right, which I think that was like, it was like a Bed Bath & Beyond or a Pottery Barn or something there, like next to the restaurant that was next. It was like almost like a little plaza area where it was a little more open. The sidewalk was not as narrow. So I kind of worked my way over to the right so I could have a little bit more room and cut my break. And that's literally when the first explosion happened, and everybody was kind of like, was that a fly? I remember thinking it was a flyover. And then I don't even remember the second explosion, which was obviously the one that was in front of Forum. I just remember being rushed with a group of people into that store and, not knowing what the hell had just happened. So again, I had stepped out to do a break, and luckily for me, had stepped far enough over where I wasn't at the location, but yards away.
And I mean, again, you don't have to answer. Do you sort of have PTSD from this?
Yeah, it's yes. It's weird. It's a little bit of that, but more survivor's guilt than anything else, because I know that a lot of people that were affected by that. And it's funny. There's this weird thing too that I find. I guess it's human nature, but the number of people that want to identify themselves with that, that I have a friend who had a cousin who was at the finish line, and it's like that part of the human brain I don't understand. Why you would want to be associated with a horrible event like that. I don't get that, because again, I was associated with it, and trust me, you don't want to be.
What did you do did you stay on the air, or did you tell?
I called the studio. Once we figured out what had happened, I called into the studio and I told them, I said, so these are bombs that have gone off down here. You need to go, because again, we're at the Boston Globe, I'm like, you need to go down to the news desk, let them know what's going on, because I was broadcasting live. We had a couple of street teamers, and then we had a couple of Boston.com employees, a journalist and a photographer, that were covering the marathon. So they became the first people, Alex Perlman and Ethan, I'm forgetting his last name, Pratt. They became the first people that were on the scene, journalist-wise, that were able to cover the incident. But also, then communications became difficult. I got a call into the studio just in time, and then my next thing was trying to get a hold, because I knew that my wife at the time was in the city with my two young kids, and we had no idea if what was happening in the Back Bay was happening all over the city. So I was trying to get a hold of her and tell her, get out of the city. Bad things are happening. You need to go home.
So the last question.
Yes.
What would you tell someone who wants to be in this industry, even sports? Like,
sure.
For instance, I might kind of want to go into sports. I'm working for the Revolution, as I was telling you before. What would you suggest?
I would suggest, it's funny, I told you earlier, I've been very lucky where I've been able to kind of weave education into my repertoire as I've been a broadcaster. I taught at Northeastern. I taught audio production for a couple of semesters about 10 years ago. I was a kind of a guest lecturer on and off over the years at Curry College, internship coordinator for a few of my years at FNX. So I've always talked to young broadcasters, up and coming media professionals and stuff. And the message hasn't changed. It's just the underlying theme of it has. I've always told young broadcaster students, etc., learn to do as much as you possibly can. When I started in radio, everything was very siloed. I came into radio as a DJ. There were DJs, there were programmers, there was sales, there was promotions, there was marketing. Those realms all still exist, but the more of each of those things that you as a broadcaster can do, the more valuable you'll be and the better off you'll be. Because while those areas all still exist, there are a fraction of the jobs in them that there used to be. So if you do want to get into, whether it's terrestrial radio, broadcast, whether it's digital media, whatever else, knowing how to create content comes first and foremost. Video, audio, written, whatever it is, because that's the one transferable skill that whether it's Beasley Broadcasting or, the Boston Globe or the New England Revolution or whoever else, they have use for content creation now, and they're going to have even more use for it as it goes on down the line. So the more you know about how to create good, compelling content that is authentic and connects with people, the better off you'll be as a broadcaster, as a digital media professional, as whatever area of media you get into.
Thank you again, Adam, for your time, especially during your air shift. Just an update, since we did this interview, he got laid off from Rock 92.9 because it switched formats, but stayed within the Beasley Broadcasting System and is yet reunited with Hardy as the producer of the highly rated Toucher and Hardy Show, mornings on 98.5, the Sports Hub. That's it for us this week. Until next time, I'm Andy Mounter. Keep on swinging. Today's episode was produced, filmed, recorded, mixed by Andy Mounter. Special thanks to Adam 12 and Mackenzie Hager. This has been a Messy Pizza production.